ES Audio.
Okay, so new password. How about... Oh, it needs to be 8 characters. Okay, so how about... Oh, and it needs a symbol, so... And a number. Okay, done. And I've forgotten it. We all have our own relationships with our passwords, whether we remember them or not. But if you're in the business of security, how do you get people to take things like their passwords seriously?
I think if you went to the average human being and said, are you, proud of what you're doing with your passwords, they'll admit that they're not. But still getting people to take that next step to actually take action is difficult.
I'm John Weeks from the Evening Standard. Jeff Shiner is CEO of 1Password, a digital password manager company who thinks they could one day become a thing of the past.
So with passwordless, you would never have a password to Twitter or to PayPal or even to 1Password. You would effectively use your trusted device. It will generate a token or a passkey that will then be used for that access.
So in the tech landscape of 2023, with artificial intelligence repeatedly hitting the headlines and growing warnings about keeping our personal information and devices secure, online security has never been as important as it is today.
It really hasn't, both because, as you say, the hacks continue to get more and more prevalent and in some cases more sophisticated. But I think even more importantly, because we just have so much of our lives online. Everything is online, not just logins, but, our full identity tends to be online and whether it's in your phone or other places. And I think that's the information that a lot of the, threat actors are trying to go after.
And, computer passwords themselves, they have changed so much in the last 20 or 30 years. We've got constantly updating requirements for passwords. Is it a struggle, really, to translate the importance of really secure passwords these days? And do you think people do get it?
They somewhat get it. I think if you went to the average human being and said, are you, proud of what you're doing with your passwords, they'll admit that they're not. But still getting people to take that next step to actually take action is difficult. Like, I like to look at the recent, what they called the breach of PayPal, which really wasn't a breach at all. PayPal, there was a credential stuffing attack. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying people took previous breaches where maybe a site that wasn't so secure was breached, and then they would take, that same person's username and password and try it on PayPal. And, I think they got over 30,000 accounts just that simply. And it's because, again, I like to say, as humans, we suck at security. That's just not what we're made for.
And I suppose that's not the worst sort of launch board for a company like 1Password to go in with it, as people suck at security. How did 1Password sort of come about? How was it sort of launched?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've got two founding families in Dave and Sarah and Rustam and Natalia back 17 years ago. But Dave and Rustam at the time were actually building e-commerce sites. And how it originally started as convenience. It started as sort of the inside joke is it was supposed to be a 30-day project, which is going on 17 years. But the goal was, as they built e-commerce sites, because they were consulting, and it was all of those things like signing into the sites and testing the sites that were repetitive, that were painful. And so they said, how can we make this easier? And so it started off with very much of the ease of use, but then as they started to talk about that to others, people started to say, oh, well, we want to use that not just for the convenience, but because it would be a convenient way to hold secure information. Can we make it secure? And then that quickly led to it holding, secure information like logins and stuff like that, where the focus was, again, as it always has been for us, that combination of security and convenience. It's not just about making things secure. It's about making the easy way, the secure way. And that's how we help people, not be so terrible with security.
And is that what sort of teased you into the business, Jeff? What was your story behind coming into 1Password?
So I spent over a decade at IBM, left a couple of times for different startups, and they brought me back to help build the e-commerce, what would become Webster Commerce at an IBM level. That's actually where I met Dave. I was actually his team lead back in, I think, like 99 at the start of e-commerce. And so I got to know Dave and Sarah back, when we both worked at IBM and actually lived up the street. And then we went our separate directions. And I ended up spending about 6.5. So I'm Canadian. I live in Waterloo near Toronto. But at the time, I actually spent 6.5 years in the US doing e-commerce consulting. And I had moved from the architect, from the dev side, which is all my background, into having the business responsibilities for what grew to be a 400-person dev org at the company Rosetta, which is the consulting company that I was there at. And so Dave and Rustam were now at the point where 1Password had grown for a number of years. It was small, but it was growing. And, I think it was about 20 people. And Dave and Rustam, they want to build and invent. Like their joy in life is not, running a company. And so they were looking for somebody to help run the company. And, that's what sort of attracted them into looking for somebody to come in as a CEO. Dave obviously knew me from before. He wanted somebody who had a developer background but could lead a business. What excited me about the opportunity was twofold. So one, just to be clear, like it was exciting to be able to look at a company that was small and early and say, I see a way that I can grow that company. I see a way that I can help. But it was also very exciting to me from a standpoint of this is sort of the ultimate customer app. This is an opportunity for us to come in and say, we can make people's lives better, safer and better, right? Like I like to say people come for the security, but they stay for the convenience. You come because you want to have a secure hygiene when it comes to security. But really, after 6 months, you're like, man, I just like that I can just press a button and log into everything. So it's that wonderful combination, and that really attracted me to 1Password.
So what are some of the more significant challenges or issues you faced, Jeff, in your time as CEO of 1Password?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been tons of them. I think one of the ones that I like to focus on a little bit is the side of growth. And I do that because, and I mean growth in terms of the size of the company, because almost every time you double the company, the problems change. And that's a real challenge. So when you're 20 people, you can get everybody in the room and hear everybody out, make a decision, and off you go. We're 900 plus now. You can't get everybody's opinion and make a decision from that. And that's a challenge. And so every time that we doubled, we had different challenges as we grew at a certain stage. Early on, some of the people that you need are the people that have the broadest range of skills. So they may be able to develop, they might be able to write documentation, they might be able to help the customers and do all of those things quite well. And then what happens as you grow, now you start to get larger. And so now you'll have a specialist. Now you'll have the developer that just wants to develop and is awesome at it. And a person who just wants to write documentation is awesome at it. And you start to see the people who really had the value because they could do all of the different things together when you were small. Now they struggle to find a place because they don't want to do any one of these, and yet now they're sort of specialists in each group. And so that's a problem as you sort of hit the 50 or maybe 100-person mark. As you start to hit the 200-person mark, I remember we had early on, we used to say, we'll never have a manager. We'll never have a manager. And it was just, don't get me wrong, I loved my time at IBM, but some of the things back then in the 90s from the manager side were just a little too, I think, formal. So that was that, early on we're like, we'll never have a manager. And when we hit, I think 150 people, we're like, we need a manager. And it was a really hard decision to get that first manager, who is Rob, who led our customer support group. And then once we had one, we were thrilled and couldn't wait to get a second. And it was just growth at every stage. Now, as we hit the really large, I'm going to call them really large numbers of 900 people, communication becomes a problem. Communication and focus. How do we get 900 people to understand where we're trying to go? And so we're putting a big push on OKRs this year, objectives and key results, where we can start at the company level and say, these are the 4 things we're trying to do. And then at each level down, people set their objectives and key results that ultimately level up to the company objectives. But it's interesting because at every stage you learn and you have to solve new problems.
That is quite interesting because for a lot of companies, a lot of teams, managers can be a bit of an issue, whether that's them, struggling to balance their workload with actually managing, or the people below them struggling to work alongside them. It sounds like they've been a bit of a blessing in this circumstance for you guys at 1Password. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, they've been, just an absolute blessing. But I think part of the challenge is when I look at a manager, I don't look at a person who just comes in, has no sense of that org or what they accomplish, and just aims to be a people manager only. We'll choose technical people to be technical managers, and we'll choose people with marketing skills to be marketing managers, and they will both do and manage. Now, at certain levels, it's a little bit of, some might do early on 70% development, 30% people management, and later on it's going to be 70% people management, 30% development. But I think what you end up with is people who understand the role, understand what those folks are going through, as opposed to just a manager who's completely outside of that field, and it's just very difficult to connect in that regard. So that's worked for us.
In terms of other challenges, is it a challenge to sell something that's ultimately, a responsibility rather than something that's perhaps entertainment, for example? What are the challenges around selling the idea of, trying to be a bit more responsible with your security?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it in terms of who we sell to, right? And so we'll sell up the CISO, CIO path as opposed to the CMO path. And because of that, the problems you're solving are problems of security, but they're also problems of productivity. I remember talking to a CTO of a large enterprise, and I asked them, what's your biggest problem? And he said to me, we need to give our people the tools that will make them productive at their jobs, but somehow we also have to keep the company secure. And so I look at that as that's a real problem, especially in this day of SaaS, because nowadays you'll go out and you'll just bring apps in as a person into the company. I'm going to bring in Monday, or I'm going to bring in Figma, I'm going to bring in, and IT probably has no view into half the apps that the company's using. And here you've got, it might be customer data, it might be IP, it might be brand information that's going into these apps that the company has no visibility into. And so when we say, look, a lot of the security software is at the IT level, and we integrate and partner with them. So SSOs like Okta and Azure and so on and so forth, the SIMs that do the threat detection, the MFA solutions like Duo, like all of these different solutions tend to live at the IT level. 1Password lives at the human. We live at the person, at the employee, and we're helping that employee. And the reason the employee's using it is because it makes it easier for them. They just have to tap to log in and stuff like that. They don't have to worry about it, and they don't have to, worry about their security hygiene, but it's also convenient for them. But then at a business level, that really makes the business feel better, because obviously their folks are more secure, but it also helps that business understand what tools are being used, where that data is going, and that provides a lot of value. So you're right. It's not the, hey, come use this fun tool, but you know what? It's actually a tool that over time, I think people really, really appreciate, and I would argue enjoy. So it's actually kind of nice in that regard, because most security software is not necessarily software you enjoy.
Let's take a break now. In part 2, Jeff explains what passkeys are and how they might replace passwords, and also shares his advice for young entrepreneurs.
I've always followed one sort of rule or one plan in my career, and that is, what do I want to do next?
And obviously 1Password's designed for anyone to be able to use it. It's quite simple and easy to use as an app. In terms of growth though, what do you sort of aim for going forwards? And do you tend to market 1Password very much to the public?
Yeah, so in terms of growth, I assume you mean like business growth in this case. And when we look at business growth, yeah, we very much aim to go down two paths. One is the business path, the other is the consumer path. I think it's very important that people use it both at work and at home because I think it's habit forming. But one of the paths that we've taken and chosen to take is to sit there and say, how do we give it, like if you buy a business account, everybody at that business gets a free family account. And that's a way that I want to be able to say, like, we don't have a free tier, we're a premium solution, but I still want a way that I can, in effect, give it to free for the people. And so if your business is using, if your company is using it, you obviously get to use it at work, but then you also get a free, completely separate family account. So the business has no view into it, but that's free for your family. And so when we look at it from that point of view, my goal is to really help drive on the B2B side, like help businesses stay secure. I like to say, keep your business secure by securing the people that work there. But then I also want to be able to say, and secure, them at home, but not just them, their family. And that's why we give the family accounts, because then it becomes habit forming. And admittedly, some of that is a bit self-serving, because if we can get a family to use it, they're going to bring it into the other businesses that they work for in that. So it's not entirely altruistic, but it really, I think, is important. And so when we look at it from a business growth point of view, we're going to get the bulk of our growth from selling to businesses over, even although we continue to sell to consumers, but mostly because I'm trying to sell it to the businesses and then give it to the employees for free as a result.
We've sort of talked about the importance of passwords already, but you do hear stories, and it comes out in articles, there's some research that suggests the most used password is password 1 or whatever. Do you guys sort of use research like that at all to inform your decisions going forward?
We do. Now, I'll be clear, we can't do that research ourselves because we have no ability to look into people's vaults, just no technical ability. It always worries me when I see research like that. I'm like, how did they get that information? That worries me. But what we do is, as part of our password generator, we actually get lists of commonly used passwords to ensure that those passwords aren't generated by our generator, or if somebody types them in by hand, if you use like Dragon's a common one, or things like that. We will mark them in what we call Watchtower in our security health system, that you can look at when you use 1Password, that tells you, are you reusing passwords? Do you have weak passwords? And it will mark that as a very weak password because it is on that list. So we actually take those lists and integrate it into 1Password in a way that we can help the consumer avoid those passwords.
When we met at Web Summit last year, Jeff, we were talking a bit more about the sort of tech side of things and the growing use really of biotech, whether it's Face ID or fingerprint ID. Going forward, do you think that's going to become more and more accessible so that almost every device you use has that level of security going forward, really?
There's a couple of misconceptions there that I'll try and talk about briefly. But yes, if I look at it in terms of biometrics, I'm going to argue is on almost, like you say, almost every device. And so if I think of it today, when I go and log into 1Password today, sure, I've got my account password and my secret key, but I enter that once at the beginning, and after that, I'm using my finger or my face. And what happens there is on the device, so let's say I'm using my iPhone, use Face ID. What it does is it goes to what's called a secure enclave on my phone, and there retrieves my information that allows me to unlock 1Password. And so that information doesn't leave the phone. But what's also important is I still have the actual account information to unlock 1Password. I'm not actually using my face to unlock 1Password. And it's the same thing with all of the apps that you unlock, say, on your phone or on your desktop. What you're really doing is saving, in effect, the credentials locally on that device, and then using your biometrics to unlock that, and then send the credentials to the to the source, with Twitter, PayPal, 1Password, or otherwise. And that's important for a few reasons. Like, it's important mostly because you don't want each app or each service to have your facial or your biometric information. If that were ever stolen in a way that it could be used, as you can imagine, it's very hard to change your finger or your face. And that's where we get into what I think going forward is going to be the solution that certainly we are championing, and I think you'll see the platforms champion as which is passwordless. Now, passwordless sometimes gets misconstrued to be biometrics because, again, biometrics plays a role, but it's different. So with passwordless, you would never have a password to to Twitter or to PayPal or even to 1Password, you would effectively use your trusted device. It will generate a token or a passkey that will then be used for that access. And that's, as you remember from November when we purchased, when we acquired Passage is a passkey provider. So we'll be a passkey provider as well, which means companies can, come to us for a passkey. But the benefit of a passkey is there's actually no credential there that needs to be stored at the end site. So if you think of a PayPal, there's no credential stuffing attack possible because there's nobody who's got username and password there. Like in the future, obviously that's not the case today, but that's the promise of passkeys in the future, is that it's just a token and things like credential stuffing attacks go away.
And is that something you can see going forward, a situation where passwords literally are no longer a thing? No one ever has to come up with one again because everything is biometric through a passkey and then into whatever you're trying to access?
I want to drive in that direction. I mean, if I'm honest with myself, it's, I'm a little old, but I remember 20 odd years ago when Active Directories, that was the promise. Everything would go through an Active Directory and there wouldn't be passwords. And then it was single sign-on servers. And then it was like sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook and so on and so forth. Like there's always the promise of it. I think the reality is passkeys will come. Passkeys will be a very positive force. We'll see them over the next, I'm going to say probably 1 to 3 years before we really start to see them in full force. But they'll become a lot more present, a lot more used, just because they have both security and convenience benefits. But the reality is there's still going to be a big mix of everything that's used. I can't see companies forcing you, if you have a password, to change it to a passkey. There'll be some services that don't pick it up. So there's going to be a real mix. And that's going to introduce another challenge to us human beings, right? Because we don't wake up in the morning and say, how do I authenticate to this service? You just want to go and log on to, whatever tool you're using. So part of what we're trying to focus on at 1Password is not only passkeys and drive that forward, but provide what we call universal sign-on, which is a fancy way of saying, regardless of how you authenticate, whether you use a password, you sign in with Google, you sign in with, let's say, Okta or Azure, or you use a passkey, you come to 1Password, you say, hey, I want to go open Figma, and we'll open Figma using, whatever method you use, and you as a person don't have to remember that. So that's another sort of challenge that I think we as people will see, but it's one that 1Password can make a seamless experience for the people.
Where is 1Password going now? I mean, how do you grow in the world of online security?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides of that. One, the reality is there's still a huge, honestly, majority of the people and businesses that aren't using a solution. And so I think we just have the opportunity to continue to grow at scale for years, as the premier enterprise password management solution. But I also think that there's a huge opportunity in terms of the broader human-centric security. There's other, challenges that we as humans face, especially around security. A good example of that is, over the last year, we've really focused on developers and starting to solve some of the problems that developers have with their secrets, SSH keys and things like that are, unique to developers as a challenge. And so I think when we look at it, there's plenty of sort of like parallel swim lanes in human-centric security that we can branch into that are very exciting for us to move towards. So I think what you'll see is you'll continue to see us grow in terms of just our expansion into, hopefully all companies, but also expand sideways into other human-centric security solutions and just continue to help people, again, make it easy for them to stay secure.
And so what would you say, in your experience, Jeff, is the secret really to succeeding in the tech world today? What would your advice be to entrepreneurs now who are sort of hoping to be in the position of CEO one day?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you succeed as a company, more than anything else, in my opinion, is listen to your customer. There's the old story of the customer comes in and says, I want X. And you as a company say, well, you don't really want X. What you want is Y. And then the customer goes away and it turns out they wanted X. And it's amazing how many times that happens. It always sounds silly, but we that discussion happens more often than you think. It's like, well, I know you're saying you want this, but here's what we've got. And so I think you really have to listen to your customer. Now, you have, as a business, have to decide where you turn that, customer request into a feature. Is it something only that one customer will want, or is it something that the broader base of customers will want? And that's a big part of the challenge. But ultimately, it just comes down to listening to your customers. They're more than happy to tell you what problems they're trying to solve. And if that's a problem that you think you've got a real edge at solving, then I think you go for it. So it sounds simple, but it's surprisingly difficult to do, right? You really have to listen to your customers. Then in terms of being CEO and how to become CEO, I don't know. I've always followed one sort of rule or one plan in my career, and that is, what do I want to do next? So I remember back again in the 90s when my team leader left and I wanted to be the team leader. That's where I saw. So I was in a development shop. I wanted to be the team leader. That's what I saw. And then I started to see, oh, okay, well, that's what the next level does, or the next role that I want. And I would sit there and say, that appeals to me, usually because of the decision making that they could have. And while I don't necessarily know that I would do it in the same way as the person in that role, I could see that I could be successful at that. So I always looked at my career as, whose role do I want next? And eventually it got to the point where I want the CEO's role next. But it was never the plan of, hey, like in X number of years, I'm going to be the CEO. I always just looked at what role I wanted next and why I wanted that.
And you still love it today?
I do. It's a challenge, don't get me wrong. But I think it's the fact that it's a challenge that makes it exciting.
That was 1Password CEO Jeff Shiner. For more interviews, news and analysis, head to standard.co.uk/business or pick up the Evening Standard newspaper.